It's time to get the story behind the story. Interviews with newsmakers, news breakers, and Vermonters making a difference. WCAX presents 802 News with Mark Johnson. Here's Mark.
I have never aspired to be 90 years old. Give me a good solid 80, I frequently thought, just like my dad who died peacefully in his sleep in his home. My mom also passed away easily. She was 88 in good health until almost the very end. My brother and I were grateful she didn't have to suffer or linger like so many do. But if I do make it to 90, I hope I'm in as good shape as former Vermont Governor Madeleine Kunin, who just recently reached that notable milestone. Her memory is sharp, and she moves around her apartment at Wake Robin in Shelburne with great balance, agility, and ease. Sure, she tires more easily, and once in a while she loses her train of thought, but who doesn't, including me? Madeleine Kunin is not only active, she still has passion. She's irritated by the recent challenges to a woman's right to choose and appalled at the country's current polarized political climate. She was flabbergasted the day I visited that the Burlington Free Press, where we both once worked as reporters, she a few decades before I did, had featured a puff piece about mansions in Vermont on the front page, with the attack on Israel the day before below the fold. Active? You bet. For goodness sake, she's in the middle of a statewide tour promoting Walk With Me, a collection of her poetry, a tour that includes evening appearances and readings. She's so spry that during an almost 1-hour visit, she scurried around to take several phone calls, lining up interviews, checking on friends and relatives in Israel, juggling between her landline and cell phone as smoothly as any multitasking teenager. So yes, Madeleine at 90 is doing just fine, thank you very much. In this episode of 802 News, brought to you in part by Red Hen Baking Company, you'll hear the only woman elected governor in Vermont talk about her accomplishments, including later serving as ambassador to Switzerland and creating Emerge Vermont 10 years ago to train and encourage other women to run for elective office. She also touched on her few regrets, including the loss of her father to suicide from depression at a very early age. She also discussed survivor's guilt, escaping the horrors of the Holocaust that resulted in the murder of 6 million fellow European Jews, but how it also motivated her to get involved in a lifetime of public service. Kunin, her brother Edgar May, and widowed mother left Switzerland for America when Madeleine was a young child. She also talked about finding love again later in life and shared aloud one of her poems. You'll also hear from two of the many women whose political careers she inspired. The first question I want to ask you is, at the age of 90, how do you feel physically and emotionally?
Well, I feel quite good. I anticipated that being 90 would be a dramatic change, but I think I just have to get used to the number because I don't feel dramatically different, at least not yet. And I guess I'm fortunate that I'm in pretty good health and live in a great place, Wake Robin, which is what they call a continuing care community. And I have my family nearby. My 4 children are terrific, I can really say that. And I have good friends here at Wake Robin. There are down times when I feel very tired or just not inspired to write. But this past weekend I went to a wedding at Basin Harbor, which was a lot of events, a lot of gatherings, and I enjoyed it. So I think the key is to still enjoy life and be curious about what's going on in the world. I am kind of down today because of what is happening in Israel, and I probably shouldn't watch this much TV because it's scary, frankly, and I feel very pulled into what is happening there.
I feel many times as though watching the news isn't good for any of our mental health. Do you watch a lot of news?
I do, probably too much, but I feel I must know what's going on. And so it's curiosity, but I know it affects my mood and my feelings. But I'm still curious, and I feel I need to know what's going on, especially right now as we speak.
You wrote a very poignant memoir when you were the ripe young age of 84. You talked about, you were very, I thought, honest about talking about death. You talked about death being like having a raven on your shoulder. What does it feel like now, 6 years later?
Well, I hadn't made that comparison, but no, I don't think about death that much. And I think I wrote about the raven more about the art of writing. The raven sits on your shoulder as you're in front of the computer and says, "No good, no good, no good." And I make the point that all writing is rewriting. Most writers don't accept their first draft as a final draft, and that's something that I learned. And you just can't give up writing, even if your first draft is no good.
You just recently finished a book of poetry, Walk With Me. Why did you decide at this age to do another book of poetry?
I just wrote poems, and it turned out to be there were enough poems for another book. And it wasn't a decision I made to write a book. It just sort of evolved from the poems I wrote. And I'm fortunate that there's an audience for my writing. And so I've been doing a book tour around Vermont. I'm about halfway through. And what gives me joy is when people can connect with it. I mean, my poetry is not obscure. It speaks for itself quite directly, and that means something to me, and I'm glad that I'm understood.
Well, I shared with you before we started here what I thought was a really really nice review that you got in the Addison Independent, where a young woman wrote about how the book was a gaze backward in bittersweet remembrance and appreciation of a life filled to the brim with intention, warmth, confusion, loss, heartbreak, and growth. Wow.
Wow, it's right. I guess I'm so glad it means that to whoever wrote it. And that's the best reason for writing, is to hear from the reader, and that's a real treat.
Let's talk a little bit about your life, but first let me ask you, now that you're at that, and it is, age frequently people say is just a number. What do you know now that you're 90 that you wish you knew when you were 30, 40, or 50?
I don't think I have particular wisdom. I wish I knew that I was going to live this long, but I really don't have regrets in that sense. I mean, you always wish you'd been a better person, a wiser person, a smarter person, but I'm pretty happy where I am.
Let's talk a little bit about, you were governor for 3 terms. you still have the distinction today of being the only female governor in Vermont. When I say that, what's your reaction to that?
Well, I wish you wouldn't have to say that. I wish I wasn't the only female governor of Vermont. And there have been some women who have run for the office but haven't yet made it. So I'm hoping that I will see a woman governor before I reach 91 or 2 or 3, if I do reach into those far off years. But I don't think it's because Vermonters are prejudiced against women running for office. I found it emerge 10 years ago, which recruits and trains women to run for office, and it's been amazingly successful. 80% of the women who have taken the Emerge program and ran for office have succeeded. So that's quite an extraordinary statistic. So I think it's a matter of the right time, the right place, the right person, and I'm quite confident it will happen soon.
You have talked in your memoir. You talked about how being a role model was what you felt was the most important thing that you've done in your life. Do you still feel that way?
I don't know if I'd exactly say being a role model, but being able to appoint people in my administration who never would have run for office before. And before Emerge, I appointed a lot of women who then ended up in positions that were unique for a woman. And I'm just fortunate that there were a number of qualified women who sort of emerged to play on words at the time I was in office. And I feel very strongly that the women who have run for office and succeeded, and those who were appointed and succeeded, I feel a sense of mission about having more women, not only in elective office, but also in business and finance, in healthcare. Most of them, and of course there always are exceptions, but most of them have done a good job and succeeded. So I think the only place we haven't really succeeded, or the most glaring indicator of failure, though it's not necessarily the women's fault, is in the area of choice, in the area of being able to make your own health decisions. And the clock is going backwards on that score. And I think that's a very sad and dangerous time.
I have to say, you've just taken a couple of phone calls here. You move around quite well for your age.
Oh, well, yes, I guess I do. But it just comes naturally to me. I don't walk for as long a period as I used to, but I try to walk every day.
Let's talk a little bit about your legacy and how do you want to be remembered? And I think in particular, I'm wondering about your service as governor.
Well, of course, I'd like to be remembered as a good governor, and I think I may be, but you never know how you'll be remembered. I may be remembered for appointing a lot of excellent women, and that would be fine with me. And I also focused a lot on children, improving the lives of children and families. One example of that was Dr. Dinosaur, which we started in our administration. And I was also a strong environmentalist before that became so common. But I guess I'd just like to be remembered as a good person, and I enjoyed being governor, even though there were some tough times and some tough decisions. But I think it's a great political office, and you have more direct contact with people than you do even if you're in Congress. And you can live in Vermont, which seems to be a great idea.
What would you say was a difficult decision that you feel you had to make at that time?
Well, I think probably my most difficult decisions revolved around personnel questions, who to hire and who you had to ask to move on, and that was very hard.
We'll continue our discussion with former Governor and Ambassador Madeleine Kunin in just a moment. At Red Hen Baking Company, they believe pure, uncomplicated ingredients in the hands of skilled artisans are the building blocks for great food. They're dedicated to creating the best food from the best ingredients. You'll find an ever-changing lineup of delicious pastries, sandwiches, and soups at their beautiful cafe off Route 2 in Middlesex, just off I-89. Their breads are also available in many other locations. Led by owners Randy George and Eliza Kane, Red Hen Baking Company has been on the leading edge of the local food movement since 1999. Back to our discussion with former Governor Madeleine Kunin. I'm sure that one of the few downsides of being able to live as long as you have is that you experience a lot of loss. I mean, you've lost your brother, you lost your John, your husband. Help us understand, how do you deal with loss?
Well, it's not easy. I lost my father before when I was just 2.5, and I think I didn't fully come to grips with that loss till many years later. But you just face it and then try to put it in perspective with the rest of your life. Losing my brother was difficult because although we disagreed on a few things, we really were in the same place at the same time. And he was 4 years older than me, so we both had a love for politics and government, and then any person's loss is serious. But then you learn to move on, and that's what I have done. But memories stick around for a while.
I didn't know until I read your memoir that you had lost your father at that young an age. I mean, that in and of itself is so profound.
Well, my mother did a good job of bringing up me and Edgar, and being a good single parent, a term that didn't exist in those days. But she gave us everything that made us who we are today.
You also were fortunate to be able to escape. You were born in Switzerland and were able to leave before the consequences of the Holocaust. You have written about how you don't feel like you're a Holocaust survivor, but you've also said that you felt survivor's guilt. Can you tell me a little bit about what you meant by that?
Well, I wasn't directly a survivor because Switzerland remained neutral, but I felt as a Jewish person that therefore, but the grace of God, I could be affected by the Holocaust and relatives, an aunt and an uncle, were taken away in the Holocaust, and cousins, both on my mother's side and my father's side. So I felt, I was asked how it affected me, and I felt that I had almost an obligation to be active in politics, to be active in the world, to speak out on issues, because silence is not an answer to some of the problems we face. And so I felt I should be outspoken when possible. Not always, of course, and not on every issue, but on some important issues I should speak up.
You mentioned women's reproductive rights earlier. That seems to be an issue that has come back up again.
Yes, and in the most negative of ways. I mean, there's almost a fury in my thinking that these men should make decisions that limit the options that women have for how they live their lives. And when I stopped being governor, shortly thereafter, I was asked by Planned Parenthood to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee on whether Thomas should be confirmed. And so I did testify in Washington, and I'm very glad I had a chance. But it was an all-male committee, and they were quite dismissive of our concerns. And I just experienced an anger. How can these men dictate to us whether or not we should ever have an abortion? And it just made this a keystone of my beliefs. Of course, some people would agree with that, but I think it should be a personal decision within the limits whether and when to have a child.
Did you ever imagine that Donald Trump would be elected president over Hillary Clinton?
No, it was a real shock. And of course, looking back, you can see that certain events just fell together, like her being charged with, by the Attorney General, with deleting some emails, and that happened in the last day or so. And I could never take such an outrageous person seriously. But it happened, and when he got defeated, I figured that's that. He'll crawl back into the private sector, and we won't have to listen to him again. But it turned out that that didn't happen. And now that he has a loyal following, I'm worried about the future with Donald Trump.
What about Joe Biden? I mean, Joe Biden is not a young man. As somebody who's advanced in years too, there are people that are concerned about his age. What do you think about that?
Well, there is some concern, but what people don't recognize is that he's only 3 years older than Donald Trump, and nobody questions Trump's age. And I think when you look at Joe Biden's record, it's really spectacular. I mean, he's accomplished so much, and I have confidence in his decisions in foreign policy in a situation like we are in now. So, and people have reservations about Joe Biden, and I can understand that. But who else is there? And he has a wonderful record, and we just have to keep our fingers crossed that he stays well uh, until the election and then serves a second term. Uh, so I have some uneasy feelings about his age, but they're blotted out by what he's proven to be able to do in his first term, and that is all very admirable.
What is it going to take for this country to elect a woman as president?
That's a very good and basic question. I think a woman candidate is more scrutinized than the traditional male candidate. It's going to have to take somebody who is right on the issues that the majority of Americans believe in, like climate change and the economy, and she has to be very strong. She has to be tough, but not too tough so that just people look at her askance, saying this woman isn't feminine. So women are caught between two poles. One is being womanly and warm and approachable, and then on the other end of the spectrum being tough enough, especially in times of danger or war, that she can maintain the strength and the wisdom and have some male qualities and some female qualities. And she just has to also be warm and approachable as well as tough and strong. But we'll get there, and there are women in the private sector who do this very well. So I'm confident it will happen sooner than later.
How did you pull it off?
I thought about it a lot. I don't know. I had good staff, and I had a good chief of staff, and we were always aware that people looked at us differently as a woman. But I grew into the job. I think I grew more confident as time was on, and I just did what I thought was right.
Did you ever think about running for a higher office? You left after 3 terms. I don't even remember why you didn't run for a 4th term, but did you ever think about running for the Senate, for example?
I did, but it didn't seem reasonable, and I liked being governor, and I also like private life, and I think I liked it better than being in Congress. I would have to move my family, and I think it's harder. It depends if the president is of your party, then you can get more done. But and I also liked being private. I didn't like raising money, which I guess most people don't. But I felt sort of conflicted about raising money. So I'm quite happy with what I did.
And you have to raise so much money these days. I mean, it's really phenomenal. You pretty much start raising money the moment that you get elected. When you look at what's going on in Washington, D.C. today with the politics, what's your reaction?
Disgusted. Disgusted, I guess. No, I mean, everything is for almost everything is for fundraising. There are some people who can do it without being tinged by corruption, but it gets very close to corruption. I mean, I was never told you vote for this and I'll support you. There was never a quid pro quo so direct. But at the same time, if you look at your email and you have tons of it, and who should you reply to? If it's a familiar donor who's been very generous, you certainly reply to her or him first.
You mentioned earlier, you said you haven't had a lot of regrets in your life. But when you look back over what is a lengthy period of time, what would you say would be your biggest disappointment, life or politics?
I guess I'm in a good mood as you're asking me these questions, so I rather dwell on the positive. I guess in politics, I fired some people, not many. I think it was 2, but I now regret that. I think I should have handled it differently. And in my life, I guess there are always regrets, how you treat people, how you are not courageous in one way or another. And I guess my biggest regret, in a way, but it was out of my control, was that for all intents and purposes, I didn't have a father.
Kunin was married for 36 years to Dr. Arthur Kunin until they divorced in 1995. In 2006, at the age of 72, she married widower John Hennessy, an educator and administrator at Dartmouth College and later at the University of Vermont. He passed away in 2018 at the age of 92. You had the great fortune of finding when you were older than a lot of people find love. Talk to me about how important that was for you.
Well, it turned out to be a wonderful event in my life, and John Hennessy was a wonderful partner, companion, and just to be with. And I joke and I say, if I ever got married again, he has to meet 2 criteria, a feminist and a Democrat, and he was both.
I spoke with 2 women whose political careers were greatly influenced by Madeleine Kunin, former House Speaker Mitzi Johnson and the current House Speaker Joe Krawinski. We hear first from Johnson, who served in the Vermont House for 18 years, starting in 2003, the last 4 years as Speaker.
Madeleine has had the single largest impact on truly being a representative democracy than anybody else I can think of. You know, her serving as Vermont's, to date, lone female governor. And for me personally, the one I get attached to is being the first female chair of appropriations. Right? I think I was number 4 after Sally Fox and Martha Heath. And not only the work that she did as a role model in those places, but how transparent she was about what that meant in her books, and really helping people understand how not only did she have the very difficult job of balancing a state budget, but she had to do it with her hands tied behind her back because she kept getting shut out of conversations and dismissed and skipped for important, positions on joint fiscal committees and all that kind of thing. So just that transparency is important. And then taking that and creating a systemic solution to build that pipeline and create more gender equality so that it is the norm to see women in power rather than an isolated anomaly. She has helped Vermont democracy truly be representative in terms of gender of the face of the Vermont public.
Krawinski is one of many Emerge Vermont alums who hold elective office today. Others include Becca Ballant, the first woman elected to serve Vermont in Congress, Vermont Attorney General Charity Clark, Vermont Secretary of State Sarah Copeland-Hansis, and Chittenden County State's Attorney Sarah George. Krawinski, Speaker since 2021, was there at the start when Kunin first proposed forming the group to help Democratic Party women get elected to office.
I think it's important to start at the very beginning, at the conversation around Madeleine Kunin's kitchen table, I think 11 years now, where I was sitting with her and Keisha Ram and Sarah Buxton and a couple others, representatives and activists, Democratic Party women who were just frustrated, feeling so frustrated that we haven't been making gains with women serving in office. There hadn't been a woman serving as governor since Madeleine. We hadn't sent a woman to Congress. We hadn't had a woman serve as pro tem in the Senate. Only a handful of women had served statewide office. And we were frustrated. And Madeleine had gone to an Emerge event, I think someplace, maybe in Canada or California, and said, maybe this is what we need here in Vermont. Maybe we need to have an organization that actively recruits and trains women to run for office. And, we all know that women have to be asked several times to run for office. They just don't wake up in the morning and say, oh, I think I should run for the state Senate. It takes a lot of coaching and a community to support. And so we all thought that made sense. It's a great idea. Let's form Emerge Vermont. We had a kickoff, and it has just grown and grown and grown. And what is so critical to the success of the program is that it's a 70-hour training program where Democratic women learn all the ropes of the campaign, how to knock on doors, how to raise money, how to talk about who you are and why you're running. And on top of that, you have a community of women who have your back. And sometimes it can be very lonely out on the campaign trail. And so to be able to have this network of women ready where you could send out an email or a text message saying, who can come with me tonight, and get a response of, I'm there, what night, count me in. I think that's critical. Emerge Vermont has an 81% win rate with Emerge alums, and I think we're almost to 200 alums in the program, so that's really special. I have a unique path and role with Emerge Vermont, so obviously I was there at the beginning to help organize it. I served as an executive director of Emerge Vermont for some time, so I help run the trainings. I help recruit women to be in the programs, and for me, I in my entire career, I've always been one to say, you know what, I'm not going to run, or I'm not going to be the woman to do this. I'm going to recruit and help others to do it. I want to be the person that's in the background doing the hard work to get them to their place. And that came back to me when a seat was opening up in Burlington, and someone said, you're always asking others, supporting others. It should be your turn. And that was around the time where we had been talking about Emerge, and it has been that encouragement from this group of incredible women. Madeleine saying, "Why not?" I remember sitting down with her one afternoon, saying, "I'm not sure what I want to do next in my life, and maybe it's time to do this or that." And she was like, "Why aren't you running for speaker?" And so I think it's great to have the tools to learn how to do this work and to see others and know that it's not easy. Everyone has challenges with different aspects of it, and that's normal and okay. And so instead of feeling shy or embarrassed about a fear of knocking on a door or picking up the phone to raise money, you have a group of women that's like, yeah, that's hard for me too. Let's do it together. And it makes all the difference. I have greatly appreciated that. And there's something special about the mentoring that happens. And it is an important lesson for me as I'm speaker now, ensuring that I'm doing everything I can to support the next generation of women leaders in the state. When
I say Madeleine Kunin, how would you describe her to people that don't know her?
Oh my gosh, she is fierce. She has done so much for the state of Vermont. My relationship with her has been so rooted in encouraging women in different ways to run for office. But I also look back at her legislative career and what she's done. She was ahead of her time tackling climate change. She cared deeply about public education. And, if you go back to her, inauguration speech, it's so relevant to what we're talking about today. And she has contributed so much, and I'm so grateful for her leadership. And it's been so fun to see her take her passion now to poetry and be touring the state, reading her poems, which is just, it's so her, and I think it's just a gift. It's such a gift to have her out in community sharing her stories and her poetry, and we're just so lucky to have her.
Before I left, I asked poet Kunin to read a piece she wrote several years ago for her memoir Coming of Age about turning 84.
84 years. My birthday big as a stop sign, red blaring. The number blinks and calls me. Forward, this is who you are. I stop at the curb, waiting for the light to change, to let me move on like I always did when I was 44 and green.
Here's one from her most recent collection, Walk With Me, about reaching 89. I am 89, hovering below 90, which scares me. Undeniably close to losing everything that holds me together, my knees, my teeth, my head that plays hide and seek with words. Can I write, I wonder? Can I love? What shall I do beyond exist? Live. Madeleine Kunin turned 90 3 weeks ago. Happy birthday, and we wish you many more to come. That wraps it up for this edition of 802 News, sponsored by Red Hen Baking Company, where they make delicious treats that can easily hold a candle or two. Thanks for listening.